that the Western automaker executives are freaking out. They didn't see it coming. They don't know what to do.
But they're really blind. At first, it was blindsided and sort of deer in headlights. Chinese are saying, whichever you want, we'll bring it. And it's really been overwhelming to see just how successful they've been.
Michael, a consistent theme in our conversations has been the rise of China and the panic in Western legacy OEMs. Part of that comes out of China's dual circulation strategy. Could you explain that, please?
Right. It's a funky name, right? Dual circulation. What the heck does that mean? And I think the simplest way to understand it is that China has an ambition, in the words of its leadership, to make the rest of the world more dependent on China and China less dependent on the rest of the world. So specifically when it comes to energy,
有粉丝说我最近更新慢，那是忙着收拾家卖闲置，像我的苹果14 Pro 找转转上门，回收了3400多，而且转转现在可回收的品类特别多，小到相机和镜头，大到吉他球杆，甚至就连运动相机、包包和腕表都能回收，一键下单，通通打包带走。总之有东西要回收，我首先推荐转转。
About 10 years ago, they looked at the world and they said, hey, China had become the world's largest importer of oil. And there was a very serious risk that they would be pulled into quagmires in the Middle East, just like the United States has been. So they said, let's not do that. Let's move in a different direction. And the blueprint was called Made in China 2025. We're going electric. And we're going to build our own batteries, develop our own battery supply chains, including the raw materials and the processing. And today, they've essentially achieved that, which is great news for China, but tough news for the rest of the world, because the rest of the world has suddenly finds itself, yes, dependent on China for crucial materials and specifically things like rare earth magnets. And so that's the drama today. Everyone around the world was put on notice last week that China is now has export controls on those magnets. And that means with the flip of the switch, China could shut down vehicle assembly plants in Europe and the United States within a couple weeks. These are high stakes, it's serious, and the rest of the world's kind of in a panic. Like, wow, they really have us.
Michael, I remember reading speeches by American politicians like U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, like 2021, and she said, "We get it. We understand how vulnerable the U.S. is to Chinese supply chains, including in clean energy and EVs and stuff like that. We're going to respond by building our own, so we're not held hostage." And it looked like they were just making progress. You guys were finally, and then it's all coming to a crashing halt.
You're absolutely right. Within the space of a few years, between 2021 and 2024, there was over $100 billion in fresh investment in what they were calling the America's battery belt, Midwest, South, Southeast, and one after another. The biggest investment in industry in the United States since arguably since the 60s or in the 50s. So we're on track, but all of that has more or less been put on pause or hold because the United States is moving away from making EVs a priority. So we're going in the right direction, but we hit the pause button.
You have a three-step formula for China's EV industrial playbook. Can you describe that for us, please?
Right. In the world we live in today, Marco, we have to sort of distill things to their simplest form, and that's what I try to do here. The three steps are, first step, China amasses incredible capacity in its home market for different industries, overwhelming capacity. So in the auto industry today, China has enough capacity to supply half the world's demand, 50 million cars a year. Its domestic demand is 25, so it's got an extra 25 to put somewhere. By creating that overcapacity at home, there are price wars and pressures in the domestic market. And in order to survive, automakers have to get out of China. They have to export. And we've seen an explosion of exports out of China into markets all over the world, Europe, Southeast Asia, South America, Middle East. From 1 million 4 years ago to 7 million this year. We've never seen this kind of jump in the history of the automobile. So the first step is scale up with massive capacity. The second step is flood in. That's those exports flooding everywhere at the same time. And then the third step is, and this is the new wrinkle, is starve out. What the heck does starve out mean? Starve out means now that the United States and Europe and Canada realize that we need these crucial inputs, we're looking to China and say, hey, we need to secure those from you to build our own industries. And China's saying, not so fast. We're going to limit your ability to secure those inputs. So it's scale up, flood in, and starve out. And this is really like a zero-sum game for any country not called China. And over the last 24 hours, we saw the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent say, we find ourselves in a position where industries around the world are dependent on China to decide yes, no, with regards to crucial inputs. And that's like a big drama.
One of the things that's become apparent to me over the last 18 months or so is that, and I see this in the context of global oil demand, which is tied to the automotive industry very tightly. And a lot of the modelers like OPEC or ExxonMobil, they all have assumed that the global south would mostly stick with the internal combustion engine. And I don't think any of them have foresaw it coming or have adapted yet to the fact that China is determined to electrify the global south's transportation sector.
Absolutely the case. They're exporting EVs and PHEVs to more than 100 countries, from Thailand to Indonesia. I was recently in South Africa, Spain, UK. Wow. And I know that's north, that's Europe. But north and south, the Chinese products are flooding in. And where, for example, in Mexico, they came initially with pure EVs. The infrastructure wasn't there. They pivoted to PHEVs. The Chinese are saying, whichever you want, we'll bring it. And it's really been overwhelming to see just how successful they've been.
Now, you used to be a General Motors executive in Indonesia, and you've been a consultant in the East for around EVs and autos for a long, long time. And I don't know how many times you've told me that the Western automaker executives are freaking out. They didn't see it coming. They don't know what to do, but it sounds like that's even intensified even more.
Yeah, panic is not an understatement. They're really blind. At first, it was blindsided and sort of deer in headlights. Now it's, wow, we understand the storm is coming, this big, gigantic wave, tsunami, and we don't have any answer for it. China is bigger in scale, lower cost, moving faster, controls the supply chains. It's like if you drew up a championship game or an NHL Stanley Cup Finals, and one team has all the best players, and the other team has a bunch of junior college, guys, and you go, whoa, how did it get so lopsided? That's what they're looking at, and they don't have any answers.
Well, Michael, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
Absolutely. Always enjoyed talking to you, Markham.